Good morning. Thanks for being here. Excited to talk to our next guest, Steve Robinson, editor-in-chief of the Maine Wire. Steve, morning, sir.
Good morning.
Congratulations on getting on Tucker's show, and it was a great conversation, and thanks for giving us some of your time to continue it. I want to talk, and Bruce and John, hang on the line. See if we can weave your calls in here too. I want to talk and focus mostly on the Chinese mafia connections and what they've done to take advantage of what's been happening in Maine. But maybe we can start here, and I want to get your thoughts on this because we brought this up in the past. This is a New York Times article from 2018. New Hampshire, 94% white asks, how do you diversify a whole state? Oh, that's a weird headline. Here's another New York Times article, different article. To supporters like Mr. Engen, the Congolese are filling a void of cultural diversity in a town that's nearly 90% white. The town is Missoula, Montana. Like, what? What in the world? This is the Bangor Daily News. Is Maine's population too old and white to be sustainable? What does that mean? Too old we can chat about, but too white? Too white to be sustainable? What is that? What is all that?
Oh, well, I mean, the Democrats in Maine have been very clear that they have a racially ideal society that we should aim for via unlimited immigration, open borders, and a generous welfare state with no citizenship requirements. I mean, that's not directly related to the Chinese organized crime. They've come here largely through economic incentives and the disparate enforcement of laws, specifically in our legal marijuana program. But for 25 years, beginning with Governor John Baldacci, Maine became a sanctuary state for Somali migration. And in 2018 and 2019, we saw large waves of, immigration and bogus asylum seekers from Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Haiti. And that was largely cheered by an out socialist mayor of our largest city of Portland, which is effectively a no-go zone these days just because of the unenforced laws, the open drug use, the just crime rampant, rent control. So it's a combination of socialist policies, generous welfare with no citizenship restrictions, and then, open borders. They've done this in order to aim for the racial ideal that they have, which Maine doesn't fit because there's, as the Bangor Daily News has said, as Democratic officials have said, is too white. So they've never been very clear exactly how many refugees or asylum seekers or illegal aliens Maine, a population of 1.4 million people, needs to accommodate until we'll be properly diversified. I've asked on multiple occasions for them to tell us, how many tens of thousands or millions even, how many non-citizens need to be added to the welfare rolls in Maine before we'll satisfy, their addiction to diversity grants to NGOs, but they never answer that question.
Yes. Why? So we've talked before about obviously Somalis in Minnesota, and a big story that came out yesterday was this Somali guy who's running for mayor of Minnesota right now. You're like, what in the world is happening here? And we've heard some stories about it was the Lutheran Church, which is pretty popular in Minnesota, that brought over and resettled a bunch of Somalis. What's the story in Maine? Why did that happen in the first place?
It was the Catholic charities, actually. Both the Catholic charities and the Lutheran Church, they have these 501c3 arms. I don't know exactly how closely tied to church leadership they are, but they have these nonprofits that are entirely government funded, and they profit. The money that they receive goes up. The salaries for their staff goes up. The more refugees are resettled in the community. It's just they have an incentive to traffic migrants and asylum seekers, bogus asylum seekers, into Maine, into Minnesota. We've created, clear market incentives for that to occur. I mean, it's just that simple. If you pay for something, you get more of it.
Yeah, it was JD who talked about the bottom line of the Catholic Church. Is the Catholic Church doing all this stuff, or how do you word? He's like, what a shame that they're too focused on their bottom line. Said Catholic JD Vance. All right, I want to. Maybe we can circle back around to all that, but I'm mostly focused on the involvement of the Chinese mafia in Maine. Where do you want to start that story?
Well, I think the story begins in, I guess, 2019, really 2020, when Maine came forward with its cannabis legalization law. The state voted in 2016 in a referendum to legalize adult use of cannabis, but that was under Governor Paul LePage, and Governor LePage said, nope, this isn't happening on my watch, and kind of slow-rolled the implementation of the law. It wasn't until 2020 when the state passed legislation under Democratic Governor Janet Mills and Democratic legislature saying, okay, this is what the process is going to look like if you want to be a business operating in the state of Maine. And we have two cannabis programs. We have the adult use recreational program and the medicinal program, and it's counterintuitive, but the medicinal program is vastly underregulated compared to the adult use recreational program. Adult use recreational, you've got testing, seed to sale tracking. There's a lot of accountability in that program. In the medicinal, there's more of a focus on patient rights, patient privacy, so-called, and it's really just a perfect avenue for organized crime if that's what you're looking to do. And we knew there were groups who had successfully exploited marijuana regimes in Washington State, California, Oregon, Oklahoma, some other states, and they looked at Maine and said, hey, we'll run the same playbook here. And these were primarily Asian transnational criminal organizations. So beginning in 2019, 2020, they start acquiring properties in Maine, and they use the rollout of legal marijuana businesses by natives, by Americans, as camouflage for their illegal operations. And by 2023, in August of 2023, a Customs and Border Protection memo leaks that says they have identified over 270 locations in Maine that they believe are Chinese-owned properties that are linked to clandestine drug trafficking networks, more than 1,000 that are nationwide, many of them also in Oklahoma, and they're linked to this illicit cannabis trafficking network. And they're drawn to cannabis because, unlike fentanyl, it's low risk, right? In a state like Maine, it's legalized. Police don't really care about it anymore. In fact, in some cases, they're not even allowed to care about it. There's just open cannabis use happening in cities. You have to have, I think, more than 20 pounds of it in your vehicle in order for it to even be a crime in some cases. So it's a very low-risk activity for them. And we've learned that last week, actually, there was an indictment handed down in the District of Massachusetts that alleged 7 individuals who were, driving around in Porsches and, wearing $75,000 Rolex watches, were importing slaves from China, just trafficking them over the Mexican border, flying them into New England, and then forcing them to pay off their debts by working at marijuana grow houses in Massachusetts and Maine by stealing their passports and saying, you don't get this back until you've paid off your snakehead debt, essentially. So they've been very effective at operating under the radar, and because there's been this huge pot of money for them to chase after, we've now seen just an explosion of the number of properties that are operated for the benefit of illegal Chinese criminal organizations. I mean, they're regional, and I think they ultimately tie back to the Chinese Communist Party in most cases, or they're tacitly, if not explicitly, approved by the Chinese Communist Party because they benefit the other aims of the Chinese government. There's nothing good happening as a result of these groups being allowed to proliferate in the state of Maine and New England more broadly.
We're talking to Steve Robinson, editor-in-chief of the Maine Wire. I'm trying to think, because at first you think, well, why would China want to do this at all? But you're like, well, it actually kind of makes a lot of sense for them. As you said, low risk. You kind of hide in Maine. It's not fentanyl. It's not killing people. You're making enough money. If you get caught, what's the big deal? You're not going to grow it in China because it's illegal federally, so you can't smuggle it in. You don't have to smuggle. It's a lot easier to smuggle from Maine to New York than it is from Beijing to New York, I imagine. So it seems like a pretty good business model they built. and no one cares except for you and me, I guess. And
yeah, well, it's also, I mean, it's a way to stockpile cash behind U.S. borders, because marijuana right now, given that it's federally illegal, is an entirely cash business. If you're, to the extent you're selling it through Maine's dispensaries, it's entirely cash. So if you're trying to, stockpile cash to finance other activities, other malign activities of the CCP, it's a great way to stockpile cash.
Yes.
But the Attorney General's office in the state of Maine has assessed, and this aligns, I think, with our investigation as well as what we've heard from federal law enforcement sources, that about 2/3 of the marijuana grown illegally in the state of Maine is leaving the state, and it's being sold at hemp shops, tobacco shops, through the hemp loophole. It's being sold, inverted into markets in New York and Massachusetts and elsewhere. And they can get a better price for it in states where it's prohibited. As a result of the proliferation of these illegal growing operations, the price for cannabis has just plummeted in the state of Maine. So you've seen a lot of business owners who wanted to have a legitimate law-abiding cannabis business. They've been pushed under because the value of their product has just collapsed, and there's no way that they can sustain the business because they're paying taxes, the Chinese aren't. They're paying licensing fees, the Chinese aren't. They're paying their employees, an increasingly high minimum wage. The Chinese are using slaves. They're paying for their electricity. The Chinese, in some instances, are stealing electricity. They don't have a criminal organization that can backstop them for drop $200,000 on a house for them with no interest. The Americans have to pay rent, a mortgage, that kind of thing. So there's all kinds of advantages that Chinese criminal organizations have over Mainers who are trying to operate a cannabis business the right way by following the laws. So again, it's just had a terrible, terrible impact on the communities here in Maine and the development of what is essentially Maine's biggest business these days. Other than government offices, government-run hospitals, and government-run schools, marijuana is Maine's cash crop. It's bigger than blueberries, lobster, and potato combined. So it's a pretty significant industry here, and they classify it. Funny enough, they classify it as manufacturing. So when President Joe Biden came to Maine in, I think it was 2024, he landed here to do a press conference with the governor about our manufacturing revival here in America. We dug into the numbers and saw that Maine's, somewhat upward growth in manufacturing was entirely attributed to marijuana growing and beer, which it's not that I have anything, against people who enjoy, a beer or a joint, but it doesn't seem like something that you can build an entire manufacturing economy around.
Wow. Other than the principle of this, which I find insulting and humiliating, allowing the Chinese to come here and do this to us. And I don't know if you have any evidence of Americans going over to China and doing a similar operation. I don't think that's allowed. What has this done to our to neighbors of these farms and to the towns?
Well, I guess when I sat down with Tucker to do the podcast, this was a couple of weeks ago, I believed at the time that we were probably looking at somewhere between 400 to 500 properties. The original Homeland Security estimate was about 270, but I think they undercounted, and that I think that their analysis really stopped in late 2022, and then the memo leaked about a year later because somebody was frustrated that nothing was being done about it. So I think that probably now we're looking at 700 to 1,000 houses. And this is after, we've gotten a tremendous amount of publicity on the podcast with Tucker and the documentary that we licensed to him. And that's drawn a lot of people and a lot of sources out to provide us with information. So I say that based on new information that's come in some cases very recently. I think we're looking at 700 to 1,000 properties that are controlled by Chinese criminal organizations as part of this. That includes residential properties and commercial properties and multi-family properties that are converted to grow houses, That also includes flop houses that are essentially a doctor's office in a small town is converted into a boarding house where the illegal aliens are allowed to, basically kept and then, brought to the work sites in the middle of the night to tend to the plants, or they're kept and, the marijuana is brought to them and they process it, or it's a cash house or something like that. And the effect of all this demand for real estate with these groups that, they know that they can make somewhere between $300,000 to $3 million a month on any given house if they convert it to a grow room and grow enough pot and they're efficient and effective enough. So they can afford to overbid any Maine family who's trying to buy a house. Like if you're a teacher and a cop and you're starting a family and you want to go, move from your mobile home into your starter home, well, too bad, Mr. Wu has come up from Massachusetts and he wants to turn that house into a pot grow. And he can settle for, he's got 20% over the asking price. He can settle in 25 days and offer the guy cash. And, the owner's some baby boomer looking to move to Florida to get away from what the Democrats have done to the state. And he's going to take that and sail off into the sunset. And, the middle-class Maine family, they don't get that home. And that's happened thousands of times. And as a result, any real estate agent will tell you, this creates comps, which other real estate prices are set around. And, we've seen real estate prices just go sky high. It's never been harder for, a middle-class family, earning, a median family income, two earners in the household to be able to buy a home. And then there's the health consequences of the illegal Chinese toxins that they're bringing into the United States. This is California, Oklahoma, Maine. They've identified poisons at Chinese grow sites in Siskiyou County in Northern California that are also showing up in Maine. The very same Mylar bags shipped from the same house, the same distribution hub in California. They found them in California, they found them in Maine, and they have toxins in these bags that we've only identified by bringing in the weapons of mass destruction unit from the National Guard. They didn't know what they were dealing with because there's no registered use for these chemicals in North American agriculture, because they're just basically nerve agents. They'll attack your central nervous system, and they're showing up in Maine. Siskiyou County, by the way, just yesterday declared a local state of emergency over these grows and the toxic chemicals that they're finding there. And so the impact on Americans, on Mainers is, well, now that the lights have been turned on, in part thanks to the publicity that Tucker has helped draw to these guys, they're on the run a little bit, and they're trying to sell these houses, and they're not going to disclose that the house used to be a marijuana grow and is potentially contaminated with these crazy pesticides. And so you could see some family move into that home, and the kids, they're going to be exposed to these insane Chinese chemicals, and we don't really know what the long-term consequences are. But we do know that this summer there were several law enforcement officers in Siskiyou County who encountered some of these chemicals and were hospitalized with symptoms like facial paralysis, nasal and respiratory symptoms, in some cases still dealing with shortness of breath and impaired cognitive function. I mean, this is indistinguishable from chemical warfare, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to sicken and weaken the American people, well, what better way than to come here, grow an intoxicating drug, make it as cheap as possible, and then lace it with poison? I don't know if this was a grand plan by the Chinese Communist Party in the model of unrestricted warfare to attack the American soul, but it really feels that way. I mean, how would it look any different?
I honestly wanted to ask you that. I wanted to ask you how much of this is intentional or just the after effect of a desire for cash, or so. Well, how much of this is warfare?
Well, we don't really know, because it's incredibly hard, I would say borderline impossible, to get any of these people to flip and talk. There's been maybe 50 people arrested at these grow houses. After we started reporting on them and really just publishing pictures and maps and showing people, hey, here's where they are in your town. Like here's all the evidence. Here's the indisputable proof that there's illegal Chinese cannabis happening here, here, here. There's all the connections, the financial connections, the tax connections, the vehicles and everything. Interviews with the neighbors, the code enforcement officers. That spurred law enforcement in some instances to go execute search warrants. And so a handful of people have been arrested, but they're always just victims of a organization that is using slave labor and exploiting workers for their operations. You're never arresting the ringleader, the kingpin, the ultimate beneficiaries of this. Yeah. And even those people who are victims of the scheme, they don't want to talk. They're always more scared of whoever is trafficking them than they are of whatever justice they might face in an American court system.
Yes.
So we don't really have a great insight into their intentions or their grand plans, but we do know that their sites are surrounding American military installations in the state of Maine. We don't have very many of them. We don't have huge, well-known military installations, but we do have some Army installations. And those are, enveloped with properties controlled by the Chinese mafia. And I know that the National Guard is concerned about the co-location of Chinese mafia properties with some of their training facilities in the state of Maine. And we found at a site in Dexter, Maine, my hometown, we found T-shirts that were effectively propaganda. Had logos for a Chinese benevolent society that was affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party. And based on our reporting, Philip Lenzacki at the Daily Caller News Foundation was able to look at mugshots from some of the few people who have been arrested and trace them back to Chinese state-run media and videos put out of Communist Party events in New York and find those two individuals. So they're out on bail for operating a marijuana growing operation out of a chicken barn in central Maine. And as they're out on bail, they're flying back to China and doing state media and saying, hey, we're going to be back in America and we're bringing home the bacon. We're bringing home investment for our local communities. Just classic United Front work. So there's undeniable, provable ties. Weizan Huang is the name of the chairman of the Benevolent Society that we found evidence of in Dexter, Maine, and he was arrested for running a marijuana growing illegal business in central Maine. So there's undeniable ties to the Chinese Communist Party.
Steve Robinson, editor-in-chief of the Maine Wire. I got a few more questions, but is there anything that you didn't get out with your 2-hour interview with Tucker that you left and you're like, I wish we got to this and I didn't say this?
Well, I mean, I wish maybe we'd focused or I'd talked more about the poisons aspect of it, because that I think is increasingly going to be an avenue that can draw bipartisan unity around. Yeah. I think that there's criticism of the reporting that I've encountered is, this is Reefer Madness 2.0. Why are you so mad that people are smoking pot? And that's not the case at all. Like, I don't care. Trust me, I am the last person to judge you if you want to go smoke a joint or have a beer. It doesn't matter to me. But just like most people don't want illegal Chinese poisons in their beer or their dog food, I don't think we should want illegal Chinese poisons in our marijuana. Seems like a very moderate request. And I think that we could leverage RFK's success with the Make America Healthy Again movement to build consensus around that position and use it as a way of protecting our population from what could be irreparable harm. We don't even know. If the Chinese grown illegal marijuana contaminated with these pesticides, fungicides, fumigants, toxins, what have you, if these were having a huge health effect on the American population, we really wouldn't know because it's so underregulated. There's not a lot of transparency. Once the product leaves Maine, we have no idea. It could be sold at a tobacco shop in Ohio, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota. We don't know. And if people are getting sick, there's really no way to track that. It's back to a specific location where it's being grown. And none of these chemicals are so exotic, and people don't even think to look for them. We would never even be testing for them in the first place. Like the marijuana labs in Maine don't even test for these unregistered Chinese pesticides. So there's so much more that can be done on the public health front, I think, to protect the American people who do want to consume marijuana. And if they want to consume marijuana, they should be able to reasonably rely on a legal, regulated system that's going to ensure that they don't have a really, really good chance of consuming Chinese poisons, which right now, sadly, they do.
Yeah, where are the LL Bean environmentalists on that point?
That's another thing is the out in Siskiyou National Forest, they are just laying waste to the natural environment. They are diverting water. They are, there's, wildlife is being destroyed. Every time they bust one of these facilities, they find dead, abused animals, and the natural environment just totally exploited. And we find similar things here in Maine. I mean, the houses are poisoned, and they're doing illegal dumping, all over the place. I mean, just give you an example. Tucker and I, we found a property that was very close to property that he owns. And we went and knocked on the door to pay them a visit, and nobody was home. On the property, there was a trout pond, which looked like the former owners had really maintained well. Looked maybe it was 25 feet deep, cold, probably stocked with trout. It looked like a nice little sanctuary, nice little rural slice of Maine. Mm-hmm. But as we looked at it, we saw that the detritus from growing marijuana over the years had been dumped into the pond. So it was totally contaminated. There was no life in the pond now, totally killed. And you see that playing out at, 700 to 1,000 properties across Maine, where they don't hire a dumpster or go to a landfill. They just throw it out in the woods, throw it in the backyard, and you can see it time and time again. Landscapes totally devastated and poisoned. And, some family is going to buy that place with no disclosure, realize after the transaction has been finalized what they bought, and they're going to be on the hook for an environmental remediation bill, or they're going to have to deal with the potential health consequences of, living in and raising a family in that environment.
We got 3 minutes, 2 quick questions. They're not quick at all, but we got about 3. Why do you care? Why do you care?
Well, I think first of all, it's an incredibly intriguing story. I thought it was the idea that there were 270 of these locations in Maine was sensational, and I figured, there's a lot of
one would be pretty wild.
A lot of,
if there's one farm.
Well, exactly. There's a lot of clickbait headlines and sensational stuff designed to drive conservative news readers insane. And so when I saw that, I was like, I want to, if there's that many sites, I should be able to find them. And when I started looking for them, it was like, oh man, these are everywhere. It got to the point where just driving around, like to, a family event or something, I'd be like, that's a marijuana grow. Who owns that? And you'd find them everywhere. And so it became such a massive story that I felt compelled to get to the end of it just as a journalist. But also, I encountered so many people who were suffering as a result of it. Like good, honest Maine people suffering as a result of it, and it seemed like there was no immune system to repel this foreign invasion, because local police or county police, they could know what was going on, but they were just like, well, it's legal, and we can't really prove that they're illegal aliens or that they're not licensed or that they're not paying taxes or that they're committing wire fraud. So I guess we just have to tolerate it. And so that allowed these organizations to profit and to proliferate across the state. Then there's the element of political corruption. We have tied through real estate records and tax records, indisputably, the governor's brother, Paul Mills, to these Chinese drug traffickers. It's indisputable. We have copies of the records, his name, his signature, the address of his law office in Farmington, and land transfers to Chinese nationals of properties where there is illicit marijuana growing, according to the code enforcement officer on the record. No one is disputing. No one has disputed, not even the governor, not even Paul Mills himself, that they are involved in trafficking Chinese marijuana. that they are doing business. Sorry,
Yep.
they're doing business
Yep.
with individuals who are illegally growing marijuana in central Maine. No one has disputed that. The governor hasn't commented on that, and it's for this to have happened over the last 5 years. This grand foreign criminal conspiracy. There has to be political corruption and police corruption, and it's very widespread here in the state of Maine, and frankly, scary.
You got a 30-second pitch to the White House listening right now about why they should increase this on the priority list of criminal activity and illegal alien activity. Why should they?
For the same reason they just raided Glass House out in California. We know provably that this is illegal aliens who have been brought into New England, and they're laying waste to the bucolic New England lifestyle so that their criminal schemes can make money. If you want to restore faith in the American ideal, you want to just enforce the laws equally. That's all it's going to take.
What a great slam dunk way to do it. What is this movie or documentary you were talking about? How can we watch it?
Yeah, so if you go to tuckercarlson.com, it's called High Crimes, and it took us about 600 days of work going around documenting the Chinese grows in the state. But I think we tell a story that is, I think we'll capture people's attention. I think we tell the story in a compelling way, and in a way that's very, very hard for people to deny. And then also, we did the episode that we did with Tucker is available on his website as well, and that's more of an interview format. And Tucker's a very good interviewer, so he kind of guides us through the topic very well.
Yeah, it's great. High Crimes, tuckercarlson.com. And this is Steve Robinson, editor-in-chief of the Maine Wire. Steve, congratulations on your many years of actual journalism here. And this will make a difference and make our country better. Thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we'll talk again. Mike Slater, Breitbart News Daily. Spread the word.